One of the most famous paintings of all time is a painting called The Return of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt that he painted around 1667. It's this huge painting showing the scene of the return of the prodigal son. And on the left side are two figures, the prodigal son and his father. The prodigal son is kneeling in front of his father. You can see that his robe is all ragged and worn out, and his shoes or his sandals are almost falling off his feet. They're so worn out, he's almost barefoot. And the prodigal son's face is pressed into his father's belly, and his father is sort of leaning over him, and his hands, his big hands, are right there on his son's shoulders. The whole painting just speaks forgiveness. You can just feel it through the postures of the people in the painting. You can feel the sorrow and the contrition of the younger son. And you can feel the sadness of the father at seeing his son so broken, and the completeness of his forgiveness. Now on the right side of the painting, standing above them and looking down on them, is the older son. This is the older son who clearly disapproves of what's going on. He's looking down on them. His posture is stern and disapproving and severe. So, in these three figures, Rembrandt has captured the whole story of the prodigal son right there in that picture. The story begins when the younger son asks his father for his inheritance. Now this is very unusual. Back in those days, what would normally happen is the property would be divided between the two sons after the father died. But the younger son is asking for it while he's still alive. So somehow the father comes up with enough money to pay the younger son the value of half of the farm. And the younger son goes off with his money to go out into the world. Now you might wonder, why would the father do this? It seems like a foolish decision. Why not wait until he died for the property to be divided? Why give in to the younger son? And the younger son seems like sort of a brash and foolish young man. I mean, why would you risk half of the family's fortune on a young man who wants to go off and play with his money? Well, I can relate to the younger brother. When I was 19, I told my father that I wanted to quit college and go travel. I mean, up to that point, I'd done pretty much everything my father wanted. I did 2 years of college. I was well on my way to a degree and some kind of a career. And when I told my dad that I wanted to drop out of college, he didn't think it was a very good idea. And he told me that. But he didn't stop me. Looking back on it, it probably wasn't the smartest thing I ever did. But at the time, it seemed like something I just had to do. I mean, it was the 70s, right? And it seemed like everybody was dropping out, and everybody was hitchhiking around the country, and everybody was going back to the land. And I wanted to be part of that too. It was just something that I had to do. The poet Khalil Gibran wrote this: "You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth." In other words, you can't control your children all their lives. At some point you have to let them go and live life for themselves. And I think that's what the father of the prodigal son is doing in this story. He knows that he has to let his son learn his own lessons and live his own life. So the prodigal son goes off and he blows the whole inheritance on gambling and alcohol and women and dissolute living. A fool and his money are soon parted. It got so bad, he had to sell himself to a farmer so that he could have a job feeding the pigs. And he got so hungry that he wished he could just eat the pods that he was feeding to these pigs. And so it says, he came to himself. That phrase captures what happens when you hit bottom. He came to himself. He realized that he wasn't going anywhere, that he had actually ruined his whole life and wasted the whole inheritance. And he said to himself, I really messed up, and I've got to do something about it. It's nobody's fault but my own. And apparently this is the only way that the prodigal son can learn a lesson. He's one of those people that just has to hit rock bottom before they can learn. So he makes up this little speech for when he comes home to his father. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your slaves. So he leaves the pigs and he sets off to go home. He's broken, beat down, begging for food on the way, practicing his speech. And meanwhile, back home, the father of the prodigal son has been watching and waiting for him to return. Every day, the old man sits on the porch and he looks down the road to see if his son is coming back. The older son says, I don't know why you wait for him like that. He's probably dead by now. As far as I'm concerned, he is dead. And one day the father looks across the field and he sees his son coming up the road. He's filled with compassion and he runs to him and he puts his arms around him. And the prodigal son starts his speech. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But before he gets to the end of his speech, his father cuts him off. And he says, bring a robe and a ring and a sandal and kill the fatted calf and let's celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and now he's alive. He was lost and now he's found. And they begin to celebrate. You know, it's been said by someone that there's sort of two models of fathers. One is the strict father model. The strict father believes that children need discipline and rules backed up by punishment. Otherwise, they'll never become good people. And some people feel that the God of the Old Testament backs this up. Thou shalt not spoil the rod, or spare the rod, and spoil the child. The other model is the nurturant father. A nurturing father believes that a child needs love and encouragement, backed up by firm guidelines and a positive role model. And some people believe that the example of Jesus in the Gospels backs this up. Love one another as I have loved you. Welcome the little children. Well, it seems to me that the father in the prodigal son story is a nurturing father. He gave his son the freedom he needed to learn his lesson, but he showed him that he cared about him and he welcomed him back. Now, don't forget, there's a third figure in Rembrandt's painting, and that's the elder son, who's on the right side there, separated from his brother and his father by the darkness of the background. And he looks down on them disapprovingly. He says to his father, look, all these years I have served you and worked away like a slave, and you never gave me even so much as a young goat to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, you killed the fatted calf to celebrate for him. The father pleads with him, son, you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate with your father with your brother, because this brother of yours was dead, and now he's alive. He was lost, and now he's found. Well, I can see why the older brother is angry. He's been the obedient one, the hard-working one, the faithful one. He's done everything right. And yet, he can't bring himself to forgive his brother for what he did. He's too proud, too righteous, too offended, too hard-hearted. I've worked like a slave for all these years, and what do I get? Nothing. Well, someone has said that there are two conversions in this story. The first conversion happened when the younger son came to himself when he was feeding the pigs. And he said, I've got to go back and prostrate myself at my father's feet. The second conversion is the conversion of the older brother, a conversion that hasn't happened. So in a way, both sons were lost. And both of them needed the embrace of the Father. But of the two conversions, the second one is the hardest, the softening of the heart. It may be that that's the hardest one for us, too.